900,000 years ago, humanity almost disappeared. 900,000 years ago, the human story almost came to an end. Not because of a giant asteroid, not because of a deadly plague. Instead, it may have been caused by something much quieter, a changing climate that slowly pushed our ancestors toward extinction. At one point, there may have been fewer breeding humans alive than the population of a small town today. Think about that. If just a few hundred of those individuals had not survived, you and I would never have existed. This is the story of one of the closest calls in human history, a story written into your DNA. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll discover something incredible. Scientists can study DNA from people living today and use it to investigate events that happened nearly 1 million years ago, long before written history, long before language, long before humans looked the way we do today. We'll explore the discovery, the mystery, the scientific debate, and why researchers are still trying to understand what really happened to our ancestors. To understand the story, let's travel back to Africa around 1 million years ago. Our ancestors were not yet modern humans. They belonged to an earlier population that would eventually give rise to modern humans, Neanderthals and Denisovans. The Earth was changing dramatically. Ice ages came and went. Rainfall patterns shifted, grasslands expanded and disappeared. Forests shrank. Food became harder to find. Water sources moved or dried up. The world was becoming increasingly difficult to survive in. As the environment changed, human groups became smaller and more isolated. Instead of large connected populations, there were scattered pockets of survivors separated by vast distances. That created a dangerous problem. When populations become very small, they lose genetic diversity. Close relatives are more likely to have children together. Harmful mutations become more common. A single drought, a disease, or even several poor hunting seasons could wipe out an entire population forever. This is where modern genetics enters the story. In 2023, researchers introduced a method called FitCul. This technique analyzes the DNA of people alive today and estimates how large our ancestral population was throughout history. The results surprised the scientific community. According to the study, around 930,000 years ago, our ancestors experienced an enormous population collapse. The researchers estimated that only about 1,200 breeding individuals remained. And this wasn't a temporary crisis. The population may have stayed that small for more than 100,000 years. Imagine surviving on the edge of extinction for thousands of generations. If these estimates are correct, nearly 98 to 99% of our ancestral population disappeared. Humanity survived through an incredibly narrow genetic bottleneck. Researchers believe this event could explain several long-standing mysteries. It may help explain a gap in the human fossil record during this period. It may also explain why humans have much less genetic diversity than many other animal species. A population crash this severe would leave genetic signatures that could still be detected hundreds of thousands of years later. And according to the original study, those signatures may still be visible in our DNA today. But here's where the story becomes even more interesting. Not every scientist agrees. Since the original study was published, other research teams have examined the same evidence and reached different conclusions. Some scientists argue that the bottleneck never happened at all. Instead, they believe the genetic signal may simply be an artifact created by the mathematical model used in the analysis. In other words, the apparent population crash could be an illusion. Other researchers suggest an entirely different explanation. Rather than one tiny surviving population, there may have been two separate ancestral human groups. These populations may have lived apart for more than 1 million years before mixing together around 300,000 years ago. One group may have contributed roughly 80% of modern human ancestry. The other may have contributed around 20%. If this idea is correct, the genetic pattern isn't evidence of a near extinction. Instead, it reflects a long period of separation followed by reunion. Whichever explanation proves correct, one thing is clear. Human evolution was never guaranteed. It was fragile. It depended on small groups of early humans surviving enormous environmental challenges. Our ancestors lived through droughts, shifting climates, and countless dangers. The fact that any of them survived is remarkable. Every person alive today, every culture, every civilization, can trace its history back through those tiny groups of survivors. And perhaps the most fascinating part is that this question remains unresolved. Scientists are actively debating it today. New research continues to challenge old ideas. Some researchers remain convinced there was a catastrophic population bottleneck. Others believe the evidence points towards something completely different. What both sides agree on is that something unusual happened to our ancestors around this period in history. Exactly what happened is still being uncovered. This isn't just an interesting story about the distant past. The amount of genetic diversity humans have today influences our biology. It affects how populations respond to diseases, how inherited conditions spread, and why humans around the world are genetically much more similar to one another than many other species. In a very real sense, whatever happened nearly 1 million years ago is still influencing every human alive today. The next time you think about Earth's population of more than 8 billion people, remember this. Our entire history may trace back to a population smaller than a modern town. Whether humanity survived a devastating bottleneck, or whether our ancestors were divided into separate populations that later reunited, one fact remains unchanged. Our existence was never inevitable. Against extraordinary odds, our ancestors survived. And because they did, we are here. So here's a question for you. If our ancient ancestors had disappeared completely, would another intelligent species eventually have taken our place? Or would Earth have continued for millions of years without anyone to understand its story? Share your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.